Okay, well, good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock. I would like to, before we do the Pledge of Allegiance, I'd like to do a roll call. Councilman Goldsmith?
Present.
Thank you. Councilman Trollinger?
Present.
Councilwoman Bryant Ward?
Present.
Councilman Jenkins?
Present.
And Mayor James is here. Just a quick reminder, since we are kind of new to this, if when we are speaking this evening, if you could identify yourself and remind me, because I always forget to do that. So with that said, if you all would please join me, if you would stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, so I am going to turn this over for the first item on our agenda is the police reform update, and I'm going to turn this over to the chief to begin with so he can introduce our friend there. Hi, David. And so we can learn a little bit more what's going on. Chief, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Carl Schinner. It's my honor to introduce Chief Dave Morris. Chief Morris is a 36-year veteran of law enforcement. He began his career in 1985 with the Prince George's County Police Department. As a police officer, he served as a patrol officer, a K-9 handler, a patrol sergeant, and a patrol lieutenant. He held command positions, serving as the commander of the Special Enforcement Section, hostage negotiation team, tactical section, and all that was within the Special Operations Division. He was then promoted to captain, where he served as the commander of training and education, and was the director of the Community Policing Institute for the Prince George's County Police. He was promoted to the rank of major and served as the District 5 commander, which had about 85,000 residents under his command to make sure they stayed secure at night. He later returned to the to become the commander of training and education, and upon retirement, he was serving as the commander of the Professional Compliance Unit Division. Upon retiring from the Prince George's County Police, Chief Morris accepted the position as the Chief of Police for the town of Riverdale Park, where he has served up till recently. Dave currently is the Chief of Staff for the Anne Arundel County Police Department. Chief Morris also has served as the president of the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association. And for 10 years, he served as the co-chair for the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association's Legislative Committee, working with the Maryland Sheriff's Association to educate legislators in the development of good public policy. Chief Morris holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins. He is a graduate of the Law Enforcement Executive Development Seminars by the FBI, the Police Executive Research Forum Senior Management Institute, and he's a graduate of the FBI National Academy Session 225. Chief Morris is also a veteran of the United States Navy. He served on active duty from 1979 to 1983, where he was assigned to a fighter squadron, Fighter Squadron 33. And that was at that time he was aboard the USS Independence and the USS America. Nobody knows more in the police world about what goes on in Annapolis than Chief Morris, and it's just my privilege to present him to council tonight. His full bio went out just a little while ago to everyone from Kelly. Kelly, thank you for that. Dave?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Carl. And Mayor James, it's good to see, even if virtually as opposed to in person down in Annapolis. I enjoyed those years also sitting on the MML Legislative Committee, and I knew I could always count on you to at least be one of the cooler heads in the room as we address some of the more controversial topics. So thank you for your leadership, and frankly, to the leadership of the council here in La Plata. You've got a wonderful town there. You've got a great chief. Just had to throw that out there. And as my dad would say, that resume and 50 cents would get me a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. But here just to speak to the police accountability and the reform measures, I'm confident that all of you have read these bills, read the laws, probably have as many questions as what we still have. When I say we, I'm referring we collectively to the Maryland Chiefs and Sheriffs. Chief Schenner and I, as well as Sheriff Popkin and Chief Russ Hamill from Laurel City, who was retired from Montgomery County as the acting chief there when he retired, have had the opportunity to be deeply involved in the discussions and the conversation and the expression of concerns as it relates to these police reform bills, as well as being able to provide instruction across the state when all four of these reform measures pass through the General Assembly, despite the override, at least on some by the veto on some by the governor and the subsequent override. So what I'd like to share with you tonight, and I'll keep it high level to the degree that it responds to the questions that you may have. But I think the more important part of this conversation is questions that any of you or the residents may have as it relates to the police reform measures. Let me say this: the most pressing police reform bill that's before all of us right now is House Bill 670. That's the bill that repeals in its entirety the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which has been in place since 1974, with nearly 50 years of case law supporting it. And it replaces it with House Bill 670 with, frankly, what I've described as all meat and no potatoes as it relates to this. I've heard it described even by the county attorneys in Anne Arundel County as the plane going down a runway while we're still putting the wings on it. So I think we're all equal in our concerns as it relates to that bill and what it does or what it doesn't do. But I would be remiss if I didn't also at least address tangentially the other three major police reform bills. And that's Senate Bill 71, which is the Maryland Police Accountability Act as it relates to the use of force, which changes the language in the statute for the use of force from objective reasonableness, which has been defined by the Supreme Court, to use the terms necessary and proportional, which have no legal statutory definition. And frankly and candidly for this audience, the superintendent of the state police, Colonel Jones, requested a formal opinion from the Attorney General as to the definitions of necessary and proportional. We have yet to receive a response to that inquiry. And the General Assembly, when questioned about that, said, we will, quote, leave it to the courts, end quote. Of course, the concern with that particular bill is it also creates a mandatory 10-year sentence if an officer violates the standard, use of force standard. So that bill is not, none of these bills are mutually exclusive of the next. And when I look at these reform bills, I look at them all collectively. Of course, the other two is Senate Bill 178, which primarily deals with the Maryland Public Information Act. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the number of requests that have been received as it relates to personnel files. And in essence, it just says that a police administrative investigation or criminal investigation involving a police officer are not personnel records, minus those areas that would be identified as technical infractions. And then, of course, the other bill is Senate Bill 600, and that creates the Independent Investigations Division of the Attorney General's Office, which investigates incidents in where individuals are either killed or seriously injured by police officers. And we have a current investigation involving Anne Arundel County ongoing right now with the AG's office, which, to the credit of the Attorney General's office, has been going relatively smoothly for us. But again, that investigation is being conducted under current statute using the objective reasonableness standard. And July 1, that standard changes to necessary and proportional and may give a whole new definition to how these investigations are conducted. So that's the four major police reform bills. House Bill 670, the most pressing right now, because again, that repeals the disciplinary process that's been in place under the LEOBR. And just historically, briefly, and I know that everyone has had the opportunity to read these bills, but the devil really is in the details when we look at these and the implications of the provisions that are in this statute. So we recognize collectively that the term law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights has a negative connotation. I think it's important that we look at the historical value of that. And when that bill was passed in 1974, that bill was passed as a law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights to address concerns of disparate discipline from one police agency to the next, from one chief of police or sheriff to the next, particularly in sheriff's offices where sheriffs are elected. Now, you have a top-notch ace in the hole sheriff down there in Troy Berry, but some of his predecessors, particularly going back 4 or 5 decades, were not perhaps as judicious in their decisions. So that law was passed to address those concerns of disparate treatment. Over the years, the law was changed through the General Assembly, primarily driven by the unions to address concerns with collective bargaining. So for a brief example, the original Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights specifically stated that it was not subject to collective bargaining. It's amazing what happens when one word, the word not, is dropped from the bill, and it suddenly becomes addressed by collective bargaining. And those police departments that have collective bargaining have been able to successfully create amendments within their own disciplinary processes to address those collective bargaining concerns. But the law itself was created to ensure that there was a consistent due process for discipline throughout the state. So that's just kind of the history of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. I'll stop there and take any questions before I kind of hit at a high level House Bill 670. Mayor James.
Oh, thank you very much. Wait a minute, I have to do my thing. Mayor James here. I don't like doing that, but we have to do this now. So thank you, Chief Morris, for that background. I come from a family of law enforcement officers. My kiddo is now security forces in the military. My dad in 1974 was a police officer up in New Hampshire. So I understand what you are going through and the reform on this. You know, there are some bad people in every single facet out there in every job, and we need to protect those that are protecting us, and I appreciate you explaining that. I'm going to open up the floor to any of our council members that would like to ask questions before you go any further. Council members, for anything for Chief Morris? Councilwoman Bryant Ward.
Thank you, Mayor James. Chief Morris, Evelyn Bryant Ward, Councilwoman for Ward 3. You mentioned 4 bills. Can you give me the names of the 4 bills again? I have House Bill 670, Senate Bill 178, and Senate Bill 600.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So House Bill 670 was the Police Accountability and Discipline Bill. That's not the exact name, but that fairly close. Senate Bill 71 was the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021. It addresses issues with body-worn cameras, employee assistance programs, and use of force. Senate Bill 178, a number of issues addressed in there, but the most prevalent was the change of the language so that police administrative investigations, which were or did constitute personnel records, that changed that and subjects certain records to release under the MPIA. And then the Senate Bill 600 was the bill that created the Attorney General's Independent Investigations Division, which investigates those incidents in which police officers involved that result in either death or serious bodily injury.
And is there a call to action on these 4 bills?
A call to action in what regard?
You're sharing these with us, and I'll be honest with you, I had not read two of them. And two of them I was familiar with. You're presenting them and sharing them with us tonight. Is there a call to action on these bills for us?
Well, that's a great question, Councilwoman, and I think my role here is just to educate on the implications of these bills, what they actually mean, particularly when they're looked at collectively, to share with all of you concerns that we, and I say again, we chiefs and sheriffs, your chief as well, have heard expressed, particularly by our law enforcement officers, our police officers, our deputies and troopers, as it relates to these bills. So I think any call to action would be determined by the mayor and the council as it relates to what's important for your community. And because these four bills, two of which are already in play. Two went into effect October 1, Senate Bill 600, the Independent Investigations Unit, and Senate Bill 178. The other two bills become effective on June or July 1 of this year. And particularly concerning as it relates to House Bill 670 is the timelines and the difficulties, frankly, in meeting those timelines because of other agencies such as the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission that have to come up with certain standards and training that as recently as the meeting that was held in January, the first week of January, was on the agenda, and they removed it from the agenda. So, and they only meet quarterly. So it's placing some very difficult challenges on the counties, and the counties are responsible for coming up with these provisions, even though the municipalities are a sovereign government. So, I think my effort this evening is just to share with you what your law enforcement community is seeing and express concerns. And any call to action would be incumbent upon you collectively, the mayor and council, to make a determination as what best suits the needs for your community, and then allow those in Annapolis to hear what your concerns might or might not be.
Thank you. That would be the call to action for me. So I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I didn't see who was next, Councilman Jenkins or Councilman Trollinger? Councilman Jenkins.
Oh, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Jenkins. Thank you, Chief Morris, for taking the time to talk tonight. It's really appreciative that you do that. I'm assuming that these were bills that were passed last year, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so I guess as a follow-on to Councilmember Bryant Ward's question, are you aware of any other have other bills been introduced to amend these current bills or to introduce new ones to counteract these? Are you aware of that yet?
Well, what I'll share with you is that we and again, collectively, the chiefs and sheriffs have been involved in a number of conversations, a lot of conversations since these bills passed. Candidly, this is an election year. While the Senate seems receptive to addressing concerns within these bills, the House seems far less receptive because the House, particularly as it relates to House Bill 670, it was the Speaker's bill. So we are not optimistic that there will be any substantive changes, if any, to any of these bills. The only one that we foresee is it relates to House Bill or Senate Bill 600, and that's the Independent Investigations Unit. So currently, the law stipulates that the AG's office, the IID of the AG's office, conducts the investigation. Their report, their confidential report, is then forwarded to the appropriate state's attorney for the affected county, and that state's attorney will make a determination as to whether the officer's actions were lawful and proper, or whether they would pursue criminal charges through an indictment or some other means. We suspect that there will be a bill introduced this year that will take that responsibility away from the local state's attorney and put it solely within the purview of the Attorney General's office as to whether or not to prosecute a case. The state's attorneys are unanimously opposed ironically for different reasons, but unanimously opposed and will fight that. The State's Attorneys Association and Steve Kroll, who's the executive director of the State's Attorneys Association, sits on the Chiefs and Sheriffs Legislative Committee. They're opposed because they feel that they are the elected officials of their jurisdictions and should have responsibility. So as it relates to that, it remains to be seen what will happen. We are extremely concerned about the language in Senate Bill 71, which changes the standard for use of force from objective reasonableness to necessary and proportional, because as I indicated earlier, there is no statutory language, there's no constitutional language, and any use of force, whether it's or detention of an individual, when we seize a body to arrest them, and that elevates all the way up to and includes the use of deadly force, constitutes a seizure. And seizures are determined based upon their reasonableness under the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment specifically protects all of us from, quote, unreasonable search and seizure, end quote. It doesn't say unnecessary. It doesn't say disproportional. So the Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, in all of its decisions for the past several hundred years, and most recently in 1989, uses this standard of reasonableness as it relates to the actions of a law enforcement officer. So changing the language to changing the statute to necessary and proportional leaves us with the dilemma. And this bill, as I indicated, this bill goes into effect July 1. It leaves us with a challenge statewide of training 16,000 plus law enforcement officers on a use of force standard with definitions that do not exist. And as I indicated, that bill specifically creates a 10-year, a separate law that creates a separate sentence, a separate violation of statute for a police officer that violates the use of force standard and subjects them to the possibility of 10 years. So playing that forward, we have a police officer who violates a standard, potentially faces prosecution, at least in certain jurisdictions in the state, and then is subjected to sitting in prison while the courts figure out what the definition of necessary and proportional is, particularly in light of the fact that our Attorney General has not responded to the superintendent's inquiry. So that's concerning to all of our law enforcement officers, because I will share with you that in a conversation at the end of last week, one of our experienced commanders, speaking with the county executive from Anne Arundel County and the chief of staff and others, gave an impassioned plea that hopes that they confront these bills with a very heavy heart, because lives and livelihoods of law enforcement officers are at risk. And I will say that, and fact check me on this if you'd like. In Anne Arundel County, and I can't speak for Charles County, Anne Arundel County has experienced 11% decrease in crime in the last year. Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Prince George's County, Montgomery County have seen triple-digit increases in crime. And when I speak with my county executive, Anne Arundel County, I make it abundantly clear that those triple digits are increases because those police departments are concerned about doing what they are paid to do, what they took an oath to do, and what our community expects them to do. But they have families to go home to, and they're not going to risk it's one thing to risk your life. It's another thing to risk your livelihood and risk going to prison. And let me say this, and Mayor, you referenced it, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. You're not going to find your chief or me or any chief or sheriff worth their salt. We are not going to defend the indefensible. We are not talking the Derek Chauvins. We are not talking shooting someone in the back that's running away with an empty taser. We are not talking a Prince George's County police officer who has been sitting in the Department of Corrections since January of 2020 for allegedly shooting an individual while seated seatbelted and handcuffed in his cruiser under arrest. We will not defend the indefensible in any way, shape, or form. But we recognize that our officers do a very difficult job. And as Judge Rehnquist said in the Supreme Court decision, Graham versus Connor, make split-second decisions in rapidly tense, evolving situations. And we have to evaluate their actions and their behavior based upon what they knew at the time. So we will not defend the indefensible, but when we're confronted with a narrative that has painted everyone with a broad brush, and we all know that's wrong, it's interesting that it seems that our General Assembly, and this is the one time while I will invoke my opinion, can't even recognize their own bias. So we don't defend the indefensible, but likewise applying a perfect metric to the performance of a police officer that's confronting imperfect, improbable, and sometimes impossible situations is hardly fair if we're not going to consider the behavior of the individual whose criminal behavior drew us to the scene to begin with. So those are some of the arguments that we have presented, but unfortunately fallen on deaf ears. So I've probably given you much more to think about and said, and a much longer answer than you asked, but that's where we are right now.
No, thank you very much for your passion, and I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Councilman Challenger.
Good evening, Chief Morris. This is Matthew Challenger, Ward 2. And I want to thank you for coming tonight, because I know, we can read the bills, and those of us that have some connections with the police community, we knew there was a lot of trepidation and a lot of concern going into the legislative session last year with everything going on in society. And we know that it's had a big impact on recruiting of new officers, not just in Charles County, but up north in Prince George's and Montgomery. I know that they've had a lot of dropping recruiting numbers. And we're fortunate to have the folks that we have in our town that do a great job, and in our county. They hold themselves to a very high standard in protecting our community. But as these bills have been passed, Governor Hogan has kind of taken it upon himself to try to counteract some of the effects of the bills, seemingly with funding. And that's kind of come out recently. Is there anything that we can kind of take from that as far as ways that our policing community can take those funds and either devote it towards training? And I know this is hard because, like you said, and I'm an attorney, when you have a brand new standard of use of force that has no precedent whatsoever, the interpretations are going to be infinite, right? Depending on which court is going to have it, or which jury and what jurisdiction. And it's all going to come to a head, but it's not going to come to a head until years down the road. So you all will be operating under, so much uncertainty and so much cloudiness there, and that's hard. But how is the police community going to use, I guess, generally the funds that Governor Hogan is trying to put out there? And what can we do as a municipality to kind of support our local town police and our community, and trying to make sure that we're balancing everything, right? That the police community gets everything they need to be able to stay active in recruitment, right? To be held accountable the way they want to be, because they have high standards, and to assist where we can.
Well, again, that's a great question. Yes, I was actually there when the governor made that press conference and made it abundantly clear that he was going to provide a lot of funding to local law enforcement to address the training needs, the resource needs, the equipment needs, the recruiting efforts. I've stated many times that the recruitment pool has become a recruitment puddle. I don't know of an agency that has not suffered a significant loss. This past Saturday, Anne Arundel County had a recruitment effort set up for testing. We had 62 people signed up to attend. Less than 20 showed up. Only 5 made it to the end by passing the written and a physical agility test. And that's with a county of 600,000 people. So that continues to plague us. I know my beloved Prince George's County they are well below 1,300 with an authorized strength of almost 1,800 police officers. Baltimore City is looking at a 50-year recruiting problem. And that's just here locally. Montgomery County, I see the resignations and the retirements. But all of that said, this is still one of the most noble professions. And I think that what we have to continue to message, particularly to young folks that are interested in law enforcement and a career in law enforcement, is emphasizing all of the positives associated with this job. As Carl pointed out, I'm in my going into my 37th year. I wake up every day excited about doing this job, even though I've hung up my uniform and I'm now doing it from a civilian perspective. So I think it's incumbent upon us to shift the narrative, if you will, because we've got a vocal minority group that want to perpetuate this rhetoric of hate and discontent, and we know, and I know this for Charles County and for La Plata, that your police department is supported. And that's not to suggest that in any way, shape, or form that Chief Schinner would not hold his folks accountable, or that the community would not hold him accountable if there was wrongdoing, because we do. Nobody, I've said this, and it's become cliche. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And but it's true. So I think we have to continue to reinforce and shift the narrative. And when folks say things and paint this profession with a broad brush, I think we have a responsibility to call them out for that. And I know that there are folks out there that will. As far as the funding, and I don't know, so forgive me, I don't know if La Plata is using body cameras. You are. They are worth their weight in gold. And I know that Sheriff Berry has fought hard for several years to get the funding through the county for the sheriff's office to wear them. And now it's going to happen because the state has mandated it. The training, I will tell you, I think that Maryland is head and shoulders above the crowd when it comes to training. We have some of the most cumbersome training responsibilities anywhere in the country. The Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission is the regulatory agency, so they set the minimum standards. And I don't know of a police department in this state that doesn't exceed those standards regularly and routinely. But mental health is a significant issue, and Carl and I have been around long enough that we can recall, sorry, Carl, when they kind of decriminalized certain segments of the population, rightfully so. But then when they remove folks from an institution and don't give them the follow-up treatment and the appropriate medication, that's where we are. That's why we're in the situation that we're in. But I also would suggest that it's very misleading to suggest that we can send the fire department or a social worker or someone with special training into a volatile situation, because they're not going to do that. Until that situation is stabilized, we have to rely on our police officers. So I know that a lot of agencies have capitalized on the crisis intervention training, so that, again, while police officers aren't social workers, having an understanding of how to, I won't use the word de-escalate, that word's been used too many times, but to help to diffuse, bring a level of calm, create some time and distance in those situations that permit it. I think emphasizing that training for your officers is critical. And again, I'm 36 years in Prince George's County, 2 months in Anne Arundel County, and Anne Arundel County's crisis intervention team is probably a model for other agencies to look at, or at least from the countywide perspective, do a great job. So hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Councilman Goldsmith?
Yes, Councilman Goldsmith here. Chief, I appreciate your comments and such. You talked about the recruiting puddle as we have today. You did not specifically address what these bills are doing to people who are now concerned about their livelihood and their own self-protection to retention. Are you seeing a big change in people now putting in their retirement papers? My son's a deputy sheriff in Calhoun County. He's already thinking about putting in his retirement papers at this point in time. Is that a statistic that has jumped up?
So anecdotally, the answer is yes. And two Anne Arundel County, senior Anne Arundel County police officers put in their retirement paperwork last week specifically because of House Bill 670 and Senate Bill 71, which take effect July the 1st. They said they will retire and ride off into the sunset. While I don't have the numbers in front of me, I do know that we are seeing an exodus of police officers, particularly in Montgomery County and Prince George's County and Baltimore City. Anne Arundel County, we've been a little slower than others, but Anne Arundel County, like La Plata, has very strong support from the community, like Charles County, and so we're seeing it, not quite to the same degree, but I can say that. I'm a member of the Police Executive Research Forum. It's a national think tank in DC. And nationally, Chuck Wexler, the executive director, speaks to the problem of not just recruitment, but retention in the conversations that he sees with law enforcement executives all over the country. Interestingly, about 2 years ago, I was in DC at a PERF conference, and there were probably about 600 law enforcement executives from agencies all over the country that were there. And the question was posed, and these are senior law enforcement executives, chiefs, sheriffs, deputy chiefs, ranking commanders. How many in the audience that had children, how many of you would want your children to follow in your footsteps? And less than 20% of that 600 plus raised their hand. So that was compelling as well. So, and the concern is because of these bills, the Senate Bill 71, as I've already spoken to, the necessary and proportional. How do we, let me give this example from a necessary and proportional versus reasonable. And I didn't come up with this. Karen Kruger, General Counsel of the Maryland Chiefs and Sheriffs, did. If you're driving down through an alley in Baltimore City and you catch something out of the corner of your eye, it's dark, you catch something out of the corner of your eye coming across the front of your car, and you slam on your brakes. And after you slam on your brakes, you realize it's just a plastic bag floating in the wind. So the question is, was your braking reasonable? And the answer is yes. You didn't know, you caught it out of the corner of your eye, you slammed on the brakes. After determining that it was a plastic bag, was it necessary or proportional? And the answer is probably no, considering what it actually was. That's about as layman as it gets. And so when it comes to a use of force, if we look at the Parkland shooting in Florida, and I'm not here to judge or to second guess the school resource officer's actions or inactions on that day. He was fired for not going into the school and trying to mitigate that incident. And I believe he's been reinstated. I would argue as a chief of police that I have reasonable expectations for my officers, specially trained, specially equipped. You have an active threat shooter situation. I have a reasonable expectation that you will do your job. And I think that every police officer out there that raised their hand and took an oath would agree that that given their training and their expertise and the equipment that they have and the oath that they took, that they should enter that building and try to address that threat. Conversely speaking, one could argue, yes, but was it truly necessary for me to enter that building until I waited for additional units to show up? Or once the individual runs out of ammunition, is my use of lethal force now proportional to the force that's been used against me? To the other council members' questions, these are questions that are going to end up in the courts many, many years down the road. And in the meantime, under this bill, Senate Bill 71, we could have a police officer or a deputy sitting in jail awaiting the courts to try to determine these definitions. So Senate Bill 71 is very concerning as it relates to that. The chiefs and sheriffs proffered that we should consider that the General Assembly should consider following the bill that passed in California a number of years ago. If you can believe that I'm actually comparing us to California. California passed a necessary bill. They did not use the language proportional. They passed a bill using the language necessary. It was supported by the chiefs. It was supported by the sheriffs. It was supported by the unions, and it was supported by the ACLU. Interestingly, in that bill, and if one reads the law, you'll see where they used the word necessary and referred back to the precedent-setting reasonableness standard. So I call it smoke and mirrors or throwing a smoke screen, but they passed a bill that they touted as a reform measure. We asked the General Assembly to consider that bill, and it fell on deaf ears. And this bill came out right at the end of the session, so it was a rush job and not very well thought out. That's the bill that raises the most consternation and concern for our police officers in the state. Likewise, House Bill 670, with the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, it requires each county and Baltimore City to create their own police accountability board. Each county is charged with determining there's certain statutory language. An active duty police officer cannot sit on a police accountability board. It's got to meet certain diversity requirements within the county. But the rest of the framework is left to the county to decide. That police accountability board is tasked with appointing members to the administrative charging committee. That is a 5-member civilian committee that will be responsible for reviewing any investigations involving your police department. And I'm mindful, and I'd be remiss if I didn't reiterate, this is a county board that will be responsible for disciplining your employees. They're paid for by your tax dollars, appointed by your chief, sworn in by your mayor or clerk or whatever mechanism you have in place. But that segment of your employees will be subject to the discipline of a 5-member county administrative charging committee. And your chief is locked in by and bound by the recommendations of that administrative charging committee as it relates to discipline. And the only thing the chief can do is raise the discipline. He cannot lower it. And while that discipline is supposed to be defined within a statewide matrix, that matrix has yet to be defined by the Maryland Police Training Commission. I know that's work in progress. And importantly, because of the General Assembly, with the repeal of the LEOBR, come July 1, there is no other mechanism in place other than House Bill 670. And House Bill 670 only addresses those matters that are generated, investigations that are generated by a member of the public against a police officer. So any internal disciplinary mechanism that formally was addressed under the LEOBR, and the LEOBR provided that consistent application from one police agency to the next, from one county to the next, whether it was an internal disciplinary matter or an externally generated complaint, all of that goes away. All we have is House Bill 670. And from a municipal perspective, and I can speak to this, having been a municipal chief up until 2 months ago, it is very concerning that Prince George's County will be responsible for imposing discipline on a police officer in the town of Riverdale Park or Bowie or any place else. In your case, La Plata, imposed by the county without any input from the municipality. It has taken away completely the authority of your chief, who you hold responsible and accountable for the discipline of the members of his department, and it's taken that authority completely away from him. That bill is, here's my second time where I'll use my opinion, that bill is a train wreck.
Thank you very much. And this Mayor James, I am concerned about State Bill 71 for many of the reasons that you just said, but it will also impact our SROs. And when you have kids that are just high on testosterone or estrogen, because we've got those women that will fight too, and we're in a very litigious world. You know, you look at Susie or Johnny cross-eyed, you've used excessive force. And then it's up to the officers to defend themselves. And so I do not pity you at all. I know that MML has this on our radar as far as trying to get it so that we're able to have our chief sit on a disciplinary board for his officers versus having the county. Because you know what, they're brothers, and sometimes brothers don't get along when you're sheriffs and municipal police officers, and I think that is a disaster, a recipe for disaster. So I greatly appreciate you going over all of these. I know Dave also sits on the MML Legislative Committee with me this year, so it is good that we have our eyes and ears up there in Annapolis, which I'll be there tomorrow. But you know, thank you for letting us know. And if there's any other call to action that we as a municipality can do to help with our law enforcement, please funnel it through to the chief and let the chief know what we can do.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. I certainly will, Mayor. And again, thank you all for the opportunity. This is long overdue, frankly. The chief approached me about this back in the summertime, and the reality is that the voices of the majority were not heard. They listened to a few folks that may in fact have some legitimate grievances with law enforcement. I'm not taking that away from folks, but at the end of the day, you know, I in my world, we've got wonderful police officers that do wonderful things. And Mayor, you may recall the conversation, the MML conversation about qualified immunity last year. And I was very adamant after Mr. Cornbrooks laid out the legal implications of that and what it actually means. And then I was asked about the implications from law enforcement from Mr. Hancock. And I made it abundantly clear that the day that was signed into law would be the last day that I wore a badge. And that, you know, I've 36 years, I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. I've been involved in a lot. You know, you might imagine in Prince George's County in a lot of confrontations. And every day when I walked out my door, I told my wife that I loved her, and for almost 40 years now. And I told her that I'd be coming home, and I meant that. I wasn't paid to lose. And while I recognize the risk, as we all do, at the end of the day, I have a right to protect myself as well. And it seems that those voices were not heard. And when I shared that comment, my comment on that MML legislative meeting, there was another member of the committee that made reference to recognizing that when I left, I had good intentions in my heart, and then asked the rhetorical question, what about those police officers that go out the door with evil in their heart? And I don't know if you recall that statement, but I do. And I do. And I admittedly lost it a little bit because having traveled this country and had the opportunity to interact with and teach in many police agencies across this country, I've never met a police officer yet that walked out the door with evil in their heart. And I was personally offended, and I called Scott afterwards and said, maybe it's time for me to step down from the committee, and he begged me not to. Step down now because I'm in another job. But so for folks to think that, I think we've got a lot of work. We still have a lot of work because I don't think that the person that said that was ill-intended, but I think it speaks to, and I say this word not facetiously, but it speaks to the ignorance of some folks in what they believe, because they just hear it and they believe it. And rather than getting out of their cocoon and riding along with our officers and seeing what they confront on a regular basis. So I'll stop there. Thank you for the opportunity. I am here for all of you. Certainly for Chief Schinner, I have nothing but utmost respect and admiration for the man. Worked with him for many years when he was with Greenbelt. So you've got a keeper down there. Don't let him go.
Well, thank you. And we do miss you at MML, that's for sure. Even your little spunkiness. Stay safe. Congratulations on your new position. But thank you so much for spending the time with us to really tell us what's going on from your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you all, and God bless, and have a good night.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you taking time out of your busy. I know how busy you are. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. Take care now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chief.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, that brings us down to our next item on the agenda, which is La Plata Radio Station Road Shared Use Path. I know we have Jamie here, and are we going to just toss it right over to Jamie?
We sure can, Madam Mayor.
Okay,
All
Jamie,
right.
it is all yours.
Good evening. I think probably in the interest of technical efficiency, I will share my screen, if that's okay. 1 second. All right. So I apologize for the title slide. This was adapted from a planning commission meeting last week, and I needed to get something to Brent quickly. For the record, I'm Jamie Kendrick with Mead and Hunt. Excuse me. We are thrilled to be the town's transportation planner, advisor, engineer, and are thrilled also to bring this project to you. As we have some new council members, it is a good time for a refresher on this project, which you discussed at your work session last week. So briefly, when we brought this opportunity to the town about a year ago or so, we said La Plata and frankly Charles County as a whole has been left out of this Maryland Bikeways program. 2 awards, I believe, in the past 8 or 9 years since the program started. And there is an opportunity for the town to win some cash that the state will match 4 to 1 to build the bike facilities. Some of the bike facilities that were envisioned in the comprehensive plan, which we were also very pleased to develop with the planning commission and the council at the time. So the Maryland Bikeways program is available to local governments on an annual basis. The state invests anywhere between $4 and $12 million, depending on the year, in new bikeway projects. It's very flexible money. It is targeted to communities like La Plata that have ideas and the will and passion to move forward on projects, and can be used for any number of things. Whether it is a long haul corridor, if you will, or minor connections or minor roadway retrofits. So, why La Plata? When we had this discussion, underrepresented in the program, and your various designations. So when we talk, and then also lastly, the county is looking at potential extensions to the south and east of the Indian Head Rail Trail, and one of those extensions would come down to about Laurel Springs Regional Park before heading over to 488 and down to St. Mary's County. So when we talk about bikeway or bike lane, we're talking about, generally speaking, a couple of these here. The ones on the right, the protected bike lane, that you see in the center, or a side path. This is what we are generally aiming for as part of this radio station road project. I know I'm speaking fast, I always do. But I also speak long, so we're good. And then in the middle, or excuse me, on the left there is the type of crossroad facility that we might look to install as part of this project. I mentioned a minute ago, kind of part of a larger regional context. In the left-hand side in the red is the proposed bike path, which I'll describe in a minute. But you can also see that these are some of the connections that the county is developing plans for, and we didn't want La Plata to be kind of left out from those plans. So the ability to connect up to the existing Rosewood pathway over to the Unified Trail, ultimately down to the Three Notch Trail in St. Mary's is part of the context here. So the corridor specifically that we are talking about, I'll just go from I'll go from south to north. Starts kind of in downtown, and we worked last year with State Highway to make some adjustments to the striping when they resurfaced Maryland 6 Charles Street to give a little more room to bicyclists. But the real start of this project is on Willow Lane, starting at the schools at the bottom of Willow Lane, working up Willow, east on Charles Street, Maryland 6, obviously, to 488 and Radio Station Road, stopping through a number of subdivisions, other schools, and other places of both interest and trip generation, ultimately to connect from downtown up to the great, both your park and the county's park at Laurel Springs, and then on to the side path at Rosewood Road and beyond. And then actually to the west, connections over to Heritage Green, pathways that'll be built as well. So that said, on the face of it, might seem as a relatively straightforward project, kind of in front of Agricopia for about a third of a mile, you have a path, but then you kind of get to the top end of Agricopia and you're stuck with no way to cross to the east side or get up to the park. Kind of coming down Charles, Maryland 6, it is basically a 5-foot wide sidewalk that I'm not a huge bicycler myself and would not ride my bike on that sidewalk with those speeds and no separation from traffic when I do bicycle. So it's the opportunity to get some separation between the cars and such on Maryland 6. So anyway, seems straightforward, but there's lots of design issues. And I know one of the council's questions was, well, how the heck does this cost so much to design, and are we going to be over budget? And very fair questions. We have a lot of work to do with the park, with Park and Rec. Now, none of the grant fund is intended at this moment to go for work inside of the park, just to get to the park. And we continue discussions with the county on that. Along Radio Station Road, there are some stormwater conveyance issues and drainage issues we need to work through. Exactly where the crossings will be from one side to the other, coordination with Heritage Green and the proposed, I'll call it extension of Metula to get to Radio Station. Right of way along 488, we think that there's plenty there. It's just a matter of, kind of documenting everything, and then how do we weave our way through Sage Point, and a lot of coordination. Probably the biggest dollar-wise item is the bridge over Clark's Run, that small pedestrian bridge there. That's about as wide as my elbows from side to side. Interestingly, State Highway has no real record of that pedestrian bridge. So something we're going to work on. So those are some of the final design issues. This is our scope of work going forward. I will say we committed when we reached this agreement with the town last year to a minimum of 10% of the work going to local La Plata firms. At this point, we have identified one firm that complements us well. DH Steffens does topo and boundary survey. So they'll be taking on about 7% of the project budget. And then as we get a little farther along, we will find a landscape architecture firm that's local to take on that work as well. But we're committed to meeting 10% of the project to town-based firms, if at all possible. This is the nature of the work on the left-hand side. Surface drainage, structural design, stormwater management, traffic engineering, environmental permitting. There aren't massive environmental issues, but you wouldn't know that from the permitting process in any of these types of projects. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're happy to do it. Actually, as a matter of fact, Thursday, presuming that you are good with us moving forward, we're doing planning a field kickoff and tour of the corridor with all of our sub-consultants. So the environmental folks, the survey folks, the traffic engineering folks, we're all coming together to, if it's warm enough, to walk the corridor. If it's not warm enough, we will probably drive the corridor. By early April, We will have much of our field investigation kind of well into process and intend to come out with a public meeting sometime in early April to walk through the preliminary. We started to do a public meeting when we got this project started last year and got waylaid by COVID. There was clearly general support for the concept from the Planning Commission and the Council, but we obviously need to go back. Our goal is to get all of the design done by the end of calendar 2022, maybe early 23, depending on how cooperative some of our state partners are, and then submit the application for construction in May of 23, which would be the next round. And then if all continues to go well, be ready to start construction early 2024. So our design budget, one of the questions was, well, how did that number increase from the grant? I'd like to think that it was for good reason, easy for me to say. There have been two issues that have arisen. One is the need to coordinate some things with Heritage Green. They've been working through their stormwater, their alignment issues on Maryland 6, their sidewalk widths, their traffic signal. We had assumed that those decisions would be firm and final by now, but we've got more coordination to do with them. Which pieces they will be contributing to the pot are TBD, and we'll talk with staff more about that and council more about that at a later time. We also assumed that we would have designed the Willow Lane element by now. There's been a concern about speeds and safety along Willow Lane, and I know the chief had requested some look at it. We thought we would have done that by now, but we're asked to hold off. In part to coordinate better with the school system and the buses running through there. But all told, about $12,000 over our initial estimate at this point. That is contingency. So if we don't spend it, we won't use it. If we don't need it, we won't spend it. And we'll keep track of that with staff. But right now, we think there's those 2 or 3 items that may push us a little bit out to use that extra $12,000. And then construction, this is rough estimates. Now, I think there's a number of ways to get this number down that we'll be working through. But typically, the state will pick up 80% of the cost of these improvements. Now, there's another scenario in which they could pick up 50%, but I think that's the floor. But I think the 80% is far more likely based on what they've been doing in other projects. There's certainly other sources to tap for this, whether it's county open space money or the ARPA funds that you all received or receiving, or looking to developers to incorporate some of the elements in their plan. In their plans, we think there's an opportunity to chip that number down a little bit. I talked about the coordinated approach with the county, but we see a potential pipeline of projects over the next 4 years or so that could really build out some of these. So we're talking to the county about how to stage our applications to get maximum effect. And I think these were the 3 questions. Probably the last one I didn't talk about was, what is the likelihood this project will be funded by the state and at what level? And I think this is the beauty of the whole program. If you look back over the 8 or 9 year history of the Maryland Bikeways program, they really like this pipeline approach. If they invest in planning, they invest in engineering. If they invest in engineering, they invest in construction. They like to see projects move through the process and end up having something on the ground. They're very keen to do that, and they just made a big investment in a project in Howard County they've been working on for 4 years. There's one in Mount Airy that we worked on similar, where they took it through all 3 steps of the process. So getting into the pipeline is 90% of the battle, and then performing the work as funded is the remainder. That's where we are. We would love to continue working with your team on this, and Brent and Janine and Bobby have been very helpful, and we hope to deliver this with you.
It's Mayor James. Thank you so much, Jamie. I am beyond excited about this. I'm going to ask a question before I open it up to the floor. The one question that I have, because I do live out in that area of 488 and Radio Station Road, and I'm sure that you heard this when this project came up, is we've got a hot mess at that intersection at Radio Station Road and 488. And I see cyclists all the time on there. If they're going to go towards town, it's not a big deal. But if they're going out of town, obviously there's no bike lane or anything of that sort going towards Kings Grant. My concern is, have they discussed about a roundabout or anything that would help the cyclists on there, or if they just stick right in front of Sage Point and go down Route 6 towards town, that should alleviate any of the cyclists' problems?
So let me try and detangle those two issues for a second. Our goal with the side path is to keep everything on the north side, a 10-foot side path, so that everybody can be on the, I'm sorry, I said north, I guess the east or the north side, depending on which way you're going. I'm sorry, west or north side, depending on how you're going. To keep everybody separated so that people don't have to cross over the intersection at 488. 1. 2, there are long-term plans, and they are just that the county has developed, the state highway has developed to reconfigure that intersection, whether it's to tee it up, whether it is to do a roundabout, whether it's as part of the overall kind of boulevardization, if you will, of Radio Station Road and 488. My understanding, my recollection is that that has been in and out of the county's capital budget, probably more out than in. I definitely see some opportunities we need to coordinate our work to make sure that that which we're able to put in as part of this project fits very well with the future hopeful widening or boulevard of 488. I don't want to get ahead of anybody. I've been told that SHA is looking a little more closely at 6 and 488. It's going to require some pressing to keep them on track to do something there.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for keeping them so their eyes are on that area, and especially being in La Plata. I appreciate it. Council, any questions for Jamie on this project? Councilwoman Bryant Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jamie, this is Evelyn Bryant Ward, Councilwoman for Ward 3. You mentioned the state a couple of times in that, and I saw the path for the bike path, and you mentioned through the town. Would that be on 6? Because 6 is very narrow. I can't imagine bikes being on that, and whatever the state thought they were doing when they came in and did the work on 6, they made a hot mess. It's a hot mess when you get into the town on 6 headed to Washington Avenue. We've got traffic backed up so far now at the end of the day during rush hour. It never was like that because cars could at least merge over to the right. They can't do that now. So it's backed up to the railroad tracks. So would your project include widening 6 and taking a look at that?
So on 6, it's everything that is east or north of Willow Lane. So coming into downtown is not part of the project. So it's Willow Lane, 6, 48 radio station. One of the concepts, or the concept that we are looking at right now would be to take out the existing sidewalk, or I should, a combination of taking out the existing sidewalk and pushing it back a little bit into the hill to get a good full 10-foot side path with a 4 or 5 foot buffer, typically a grass buffer in between. And actually to then narrow the single lanes on Maryland 6 to slow down traffic as it comes into town. But not to widen 6 itself by any stretch. We want to slow people down coming into town.
Thank you.
Councilman Trollinger.
Hey, good evening. Matt Trollinger from Ward 2. So as I understand it, just kind of skipping to the end with the grant agreement in the packet that was presented. And I got a couple questions about this. So this is in total, as you've described it, a 2.25 mile range from where you said from Willow Lane to radio station. Is that right?
To the park, correct.
Okay. And the total amount of money that the state has for this just overall project, that's the $9.2 million. Is that, or is
the state, I would say their average kind of Bikeways budget over the past few years has been in the $7 to $9 million range. This project, the design work is about 430. At this moment, the construction estimate is around, what's it, 1.5 with some opportunities to tip away.
okay? Well, I'm just looking at the grant agreement. So what the 9.2 million is referring to the overall, multi-year program, right?
Statewide, correct.
Right. So is this first come, first served? How are they doing this allocation of money? Because one of my thoughts in looking at this project is, we're doing this on the roadway. Was there any thought to taking the cyclists and this path off of the roads itself? And you know what I mean?
By creating the 10-foot pathway and the 5-foot buffer, and that buffer would probably be a curved buffer. It will depend. The intention is to truly be off to the side of the road. So if you go back to like that second or third slide that I put up there, now as you get up to Agricopia, for example, you've got the side path that is well set back, probably 40 to 50 feet from the road. That's not really feasible along 6, for example, because of the cemetery and because of Clark Run and other environmental constraints. But we think that we're creating pretty good separation. We had looked at an option of coming kind of through the Clark's Run environmental area when you get down towards Grace Lutheran Church. We didn't feel like that ended up being, first of all, it was a very expensive option and had some environmental issues we'd have to work around that we wouldn't along 6. But I feel like, as somebody who doesn't do a tremendous amount of biking, that getting to that big wide path with the buffer on 6 and calming the traffic, slowing it down, and should make for a reasonably comfortable ride.
Okay. But as far as the funding goes, I mean, is it a strict allocation of the 9.2 million over this 5-year designation? So 2022 to 2027, or do they refund it every year?
Every year they put in an amount. I would say the last few years it's ranged from $7 to $10 million a year.
Okay.
Projects.
Okay.
Yep. And that typically funds, I have to think, probably 15 to 20 projects from concept plan through design through construction in any given year. And again, once you're in the pipeline, they've been pretty good about keeping you in the pipeline, unless the project sponsor screws up in some form.
Okay. And then last question I have, and then I'll defer to my colleague that actually bikes a lot, Councilman Jenkins, who knows more about this than what I'm talking about. When we're looking at it, I mean, I guess one of my concerns is, okay, it gets you from a point A to point B, but like the mayor kind of alluded to, it doesn't really get you kind of in a circular way, so to speak. So we've got a path, right? We've got a destination. But once they come in, they're not really even coming into town. And I know there are plans to try to make the town more walkable and more accessible to non-vehicular transportation, but we're kind of abandoning them at Willow Lane, so to speak. Like Councilwoman Bryant Ward talked about, 6 is tricky, and you said it's expensive. Is there a way that this could be extended in the future, and this can be kind of like a destination, so we could have folks come in and, I mean, or connect to other counties or something. I'm just trying to think a little bit bigger here. If there's so much money available to really create a nice bike project, you know?
So a couple of things on the north side in terms of connectivity. Again, you've got the county, which is doing some concept planning on extending the Indian Head Rail Trail from its current at 301 down to roughly, St. Charles Parkway.
Right.
So, and then from there further south to the 3 Notch Trail in Calvert County, in St. Mary's County. And then kind of coming into town, we thought that because of the constraints on 6 itself, that coming in kind of the back way along Willow Lane, if you will, was another way to get people into downtown. It's not ideal, but it's probably more comfortable than coming in via that part of 6 itself. We have worked with State Highway to get some additional, and I'm wondering if this might not be Councilwoman Bryant's the issue that she raised. We have worked to get some additional space for bicyclists on 6 over the past year or two. But I'm not sure that there's another good way to come into downtown, with a fully separated path.
Okay, thanks.
Councilman Jenkins, you just had that hand raised so nicely. It's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Again, Councilman Jenkins from Ward 4. Thank you for the presentation and the clarification, because you did answer some of my questions. But is it fair to say that this project will be a combination of a protected bike lane and a side path?
Yes. So once you get, so I think Willow Lane is the kind of protected bike lane from 6 down to the schools. And then Willow Lane all the way out to Laurel Springs would be a side path.
Okay, because I ride that area a lot, and I know Radio Station Road is a county road and it has a pretty hefty shoulder. So that's
yes,
good.
this is even to get away from the shoulder.
Okay. So the shoulder couldn't be used as a side path because there's no protection?
We would say it's inadvisable. So radio station, I'm trying to think, roughly from where it splits off from 488, it does have that piece, that Agricopia piece that's already there.
Yes, correct.
Up about with Lano Drive, or maybe Peter's out around there.
Yeah.
So this would kind of follow that same alignment all the way up past the high school and then cross over somewhere around the high school over to into the park.
Okay. Not to get off topic, but I do remember at one time that the intersection of 488 and Radio Station Road, the county at one time had plans for a roundabout there. And I was told, or I was heard, again, I don't know the truth of all this, but there was a design and the county pulled out because it was either too expensive and the state said they only pay for a part of it. So, but to me, that would be, again, I'm not an engineer, I'm a planner, but that would be an ideal candidate for a rotary, but I don't want to get off topic. Thank you.
I will give my personal opinion and tell you that I generally agree with that. I think you've got the perfect amount of land there to be able to do it right. That land is often the constraint in those roundabouts. But yeah, I think, as more developments come down the pike, especially Heritage Green and some others, Radio Station Road is going to have to be addressed. And the county, that's why you have that big right of way along Radio Station to account for a boulevard, 2 lanes in each direction. Whether or not it needs to be that wide, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think if nothing else, just the intersection of 48 and Radio Station needs to be addressed.
And then I'm very encouraged and would advocate, as you eloquently said earlier, about slowing down the traffic. I know it seems to be counterintuitive when you say let's narrow the lanes, but that's true because I've seen the documentation and the studies and yada, yada, yada. But if you narrow the lanes, you slow people down.
You do.
So I would continue to urge that all throughout the town, but again, that's another subject. So it would take us maybe a year, maybe a little less than a year to design it, and then another year and a half to build it.
So yeah, so our schedule gets us to early next year, early 23, about this time, maybe, February 23, to get through the design. We got to get out and do the survey, got to do the environmental work, got to do all that. And then, excuse me, we would kind of hit a pause there in May when we put in for the construction grant. Those don't get announced until September-ish, and then a grant agreement process like the one that you hopefully will sign tonight for the design money gets us to 2024. For construction, I would remind, I think that when we had this conversation last year, and I don't recall, can't recall who was in the conversation. I know it was Mayor James was pushing us to go faster, because otherwise we're looking at 25 or 26 before we put a shovel in the ground.
Thank you for saying that, Mayor. And then just one final, I guess, observation. And again, this is not meant to be a criticism but I certainly, and again, I'm not an engineer, but I just have a concern, and I hope we don't over design this. And I know there's a balance between safety and design, but I've read and seen other locations in the States and overseas where they have a lot more robust bikeways, and they seem to get them in place fairly quickly as compared to us. So I just want to go on record as saying, I hope we don't over design this to make this the Las Vegas bikeway of Charles County versus something that we can implement quickly and most cost effectively and get the biggest bang for our dollar, because frankly, I get a lot of calls and comments about walkability in La Plata, and I'm personally invested because I walk and I bike a lot. So I just want to put that on the record. And again, I thank you for your efforts, and I'm fully supportive of moving this as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Councilman Trollinger, back at you.
Yes, sorry about that. Matt Trollinger, Ward 2. Thank you. I think you said kind of ballpark estimate, like 1.5 or something total. Is that what you said?
Correct.
And we believe that if we get help with the planning of it, we'll certainly get some help from the state. We don't know the percentage, but it could be from 50 to 80%. And then the last question I had here, just seeing where it goes to, and just looking at the goals from the program, and that one of the goals was trying to get low income access to the same pathways. Was that considered in looking at this route? Because I don't really know that we're doing that in this way, and I don't know if it was feasible to do that the way this was set up. But of course, just the way we have it lined up.
We're always sensitive to the equity considerations. I think again, kind of once you get in and hit 6 west of Willow Lane, it gets really constrained. That's why we thought that getting down to the elementary school was one way to get it, generational equity and serve families, and was a good kind of balancing point. If there are other destinations, that we should be thinking about, then let's think about them. I'm happy to talk offline if you'd like.
Okay, I think that's a good discussion we can have. Thanks a lot.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. It's Mayor James again. The one, and I'm sure you've already seen this, and maybe in your little field trip this week, you can see this as well, but right in front of the high school, on Radio Station Road, there used to be they shifted the road because it used to, if you look at it, because I walk it a lot and take my life into my own hands when I'm doing that, but you can see the path there that is between trees, that's right in front of the lacrosse practice field now, which is pretty cool. I don't know if that's something that, since it is partially, well, you probably have to rip it all up anyways, but since it's partially laid out anyway, if that's something that you could look at incorporating into the bike path.
Yes, I mean, it is, as you indicated, in pretty rough shape, so we would reconstruct it, but that is roughly the alignment there along the trees. We've had some discussions with the school system about the best way to kind of traverse between Agricopia and the school system. They felt pretty strongly that it needs to just stay along Radio Station Road and not try and cut any angles for student monitoring purposes. So we're at this point, we'll stay right along Radio Station in that tree line.
Fantastic. And Councilman Jenkins?
I'm sorry, just one final observation. And again, and I don't mean to be a killjoy, but I do have a concern about, as Councilperson Trolinger mentioned, the getting in the pipeline and funding, because now we have a new Secretary of Transportation, and then we're going to have a new governor. So again, not getting into the politics of it, but just the practicality, I do hope that we can maintain our status in the queue with the new Secretary of Transportation as well as a new governor. And then, of course, when the new governor, because it's term limited, there will be a new governor and a new team. So we may have some work to do to make sure that they hear from us about staying in the queue. Yeah. Thank you.
I think that, again, not to get into politics, it used to be my specialty in life, but not anymore. I think you are well positioned, having made it thus far under this governor, that going forward, I think you'll continue to be well positioned, especially as you have shown your own willingness to invest in the program. I think that's probably the biggest differentiator in a lot of these applications they see is who is willing to, invest the time and energy to get it done, and who is looking for, the state to send money and hope it all goes well. And you all have shown the willingness to invest the time and energy in it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. It's Mayor James. I'm going to ask council if you would weigh in, if we can have a consensus whether or not we are to move forward with this project. Councilman Goldsmith.
Yes, move forward.
Councilman Trolinger.
I do agree for us to move forward. I do think we have a couple of things to talk about. I share my concerns of Councilman Jenkins for over planning, so to speak. It's only 2.25 miles, but I think we'd be silly not to start exploring it with the funds that are available for our residents. So let's move forward and keep the discussion going.
Councilwoman Bryant Ward.
Yes, move forward.
Councilman Jenkins.
Yes, again, I would just echo Councilmember Trollinger's comments as well. Thank you.
And Mayor James has moved forward. So Jamie, let's get this done. Oh, all those words of wisdom, and you're muted. I got nothing.
I said, tell Brent to sign that paperwork and we're good to go.
Good deal. Thank you so much for letting us ask you all those questions and answering them. I really appreciate it.
Have a great night. Thank you.
All right, you as well. All right, it brings us to schedule of fees. I trust that council, you have had the opportunity to look at the fees. Kevin, or is it Brent or Kevin that's going to be handling this one tonight?
Kevin can handle it. I would just point out that in the initial section under matters of council discussion, the attachment is highlighted to the changes that are being proposed. So that may be a good document to work from for your discussions. And then later on, it's proposed legislation for a first reading. It would be the updated fee schedule without the highlights, and then the legislation as well. So I just wanted to touch on that. And Kevin, if you want to talk to the specifics of the amendment, then please do.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kevin Greenville, Town Treasurer. The changes are highlighted in yellow, and we have gone over these in previous council meetings. It's just adding the special event permit fee and also adjusting the major facility fee a few $100s to correct the amount that was adopted on in late December.
All right, thank you. Does council have any questions for Kevin? Councilman Jenkins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Jenkins from Ward 4. The highlighted section on page 6, which is a reflection of the new, I guess, major facility fee. Is that adjusted or based upon the Baker-Tilly report that we reviewed in December?
Yes, that is correct. The
Okay.
report that Baker-Tilly presented had this amount, and this is the correct amount. The legislation had just the wrong amount. It had $15,800. It should be $16,035 is the correct amount.
So this was the recommended option as presented by the consultant.
Correct. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Councilwoman Bryant Ward?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Greenville, when we look at these fees, did we calculate the revenue that we might earn from this for our future budget year?
Is this for the special event permit fee or for the major facility fee?
Both.
So the major facility fee, that is going to be incorporated into the next budget. So we will use that new fee to project our funds available within the major facility fee reserve and the amount we're pulling in. And yeah, the other one will be considered. I don't think the special event permit fee is designed to really generate a lot of revenue. It's more for the town to recoup their costs. But it will be taken into consideration in the next budget cycle when projecting revenue.
So we didn't do any type of projections when we introduced these fees or thought, took them into consideration. We didn't think about what it would add to our, bottom line. No.
Are you talking about just these changes tonight, or the when we look at it annually,
yeah, when we thought to increase, add the fees for staff when they're doing the different projects over the weekends and things like that. So we looked at it, and I know it's to offset our costs, but it still is revenue. Do we look at what that might add to the bottom line for us, or no?
Yes, we will. And since this is just being added, it will be looked at for the next budget cycle. And certainly those salary expenses will be taken into consideration, that we will be recouping that money going forward. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry.
Kevin, I could help you on, I think, to address that. And that Councilwoman Bryant Ward, this is Bobby. And I just wanted to say that we looked at this, and this additional fee would generate another $600,000 in additional capital per 100 building lots that would be purchasing the major facility fee. So we'd be increasing our capital back by $600,000 per 100 lots. And based on the projections that you see, as far as our planning projections of, say, 300 building lots or building permits per year, that would generate an additional $1.8 million in additional capital towards those projects.
Thank you. That helps a lot. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. And I'm sorry, Councilwoman Ward, if I'm having a little miscommunication. I apologize for that.
No problem.
All right. Any other questions? Brent, do we need to do any call of action for this?
Well, Mayor James, it will come up later in the agenda.
Okay, as long as we have a consensus to move forward?
Yes.
Everyone okay moving forward with that? Yes, okay, good. We'll see it see it again. Keeps on coming up. All right, the next is proposed changes to chapter 75. Is that, are you taking that tonight? Do I see Janine on the line? I don't think I do.
I don't believe Janine is here. This may have to be pushed. She is unable to attend tonight. So we will just have to kick this to a later work session.
Okay, I know what they were looking at is adopting or changing the guidelines for the thickness of, and Jim, you'll remember this conversation, I'm sure, of the thickness of the siding. So always fun stuff, but we look forward to hearing all about it the next meeting. All right, this brings us to Miss Michelle and the tornado anniversary.
Thank you, Mayor James. Michelle Miner, Assistant Town Manager. Just wanted to give you an update on plans that we've been working on for the 20th anniversary of the tornado, which will be, the 20th anniversary is Thursday, April 28th. Some of the plans that we've made from 6:30 to 8, we've planned a, beginning at 6:30, a 20 to 30 minute ceremony followed by a concert with the U.S. Navy band, either the Commodores or the Cruisers. The U.S. Navy has committed one of the two bands. We're not sure which one just yet. The ceremony, we anticipate having a small ceremony with opening remarks made by Mayor James, a dedication of a plaque at the tornado sculpture on the concert lawn. Some very brief remarks from former Mayor Bill Ekman, a moment of silence for those to remember those who perished during the tornado. And then we'll have a concert, about an hour and a half concert with the Navy band. Like I said, the Commodores or the Cruisers. We'll also have on display in the atrium for the month of April. I meant to bring a display copy. We had display signs from all the buildings that were damaged or destroyed during the tornado. So part of the sign had what the structure looked like before the tornado, and then what happened during the tornado. And we had a walking tour of that during the 10th anniversary. We had 2 sets of signs made, so we have a set, and we're going to hang those in the atrium for the month of April for the public to view. And then on Saturday, April 30th is our actual Celebrate La Plata Day, where we'll have the town hall open, and Bill Ekman made a wonderful continuous running CD of pictures from the tornado before and after. So we'll have that playing for the public to come in and be able to see. So that's what we have planned for the 20th anniversary. We've done a lot of research from other communities throughout the United States, what they do. And usually after the 20th anniversary, that's usually the last time that anything's of any substance is done, other than maybe some local silence or memorials or silence, moments of silence for remembrance. So this will probably be the last time that we acknowledge the tornado in such a way. So we wanted to
We'll go out with the wind, right? There you go. Something like that.
Yeah.
No, but you know, it's so important too, that we do recognize this, because it was a community that came together, and it was a state that came together. So I appreciate all that you're doing to honor those that lost their lives during that, but more importantly, the community that came together and would not let us not succeed. So I am thrilled to hear that Mayor Ekman is going to be speaking, so that he was there. He was instrumental in making us what we are today. Councilman Trollinger.
Yes, Councilman Trollinger from Ward 2. Ms. Meyer, it's awesome to hear about the plans kind of coming together. I know there were a couple people in the community that reached out to me a few months ago asking if there would be an opportunity for community input as far as any testimonials that they remember from that time or what they went through. I think given that this may be the last time for a very long time that we're doing anything like this, is there any avenue that we can kind of share with our constituents as far as if they want to write something or if they wanted to do a short video or add to our remembrance, that they could do that?
I would think that could be something that we could to organize and put in the atrium as well for the month of April. If anyone wanted to do a remembrance board or a picture collage or anything that we can include with our memory boards as well.
Cool.
Great. And I know I spoke with Colleen today. Danny Myers wants to be involved somehow, some way. He reached out to me the other day and said if we're doing something. So don't know how that will work, but he said he was he a commissioner at the time?
He was a commissioner at the time, and Colin and I talked about this. It's either we keep it kind of small and contained like we've proposed, or it's very large because so many people were involved and were affected by this. So that's why we've kind of kept it kind of small,
But you know what, kind of going with what Councilman Trollinger said, maybe they can offer testimony and, recall and maybe get the Historic Preservation Commission involved with that. And because it is historic and they could have the commissioners who were the elected officials at the time, if they want to participate, maybe it would be pretty cool to have them do a statement that will run through there. Councilman Trollinger.
All right, yeah, Councilman Trollinger, Ward 2. I just think because it was a hopefully generational event, right? And it was, I mean, I heard about it in college. That's how I even knew what La Plata was. I was in Western Pennsylvania, and everybody was talking about it out there. And so I think, one last opportunity for people to weigh in, and you could even kind of tie it all together with our event, right, at the end, to make it kind of something that the Historic Preservation Committee could have for the future, and you could replay that whenever they wanted to, a slideshow, a searchable, thing, or even, these kinds of things where you have written testimony can be searchable for generations, which is kind of cool. So thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you, Councilman Trollinger, for stating in such a way that how young you were and how old we were at the time of the tornado. So I appreciate that. Okay, well, thank you very much. And there's, once you throw an idea out there, of course, all of our wheels are spinning on that, but you're doing a fantastic job. And I think that maybe even I always like, and I'll tell a story for a different time, but even a time capsule, maybe in 20 years, the next, or 30 years, when it's 50 years after the tornado, maybe there's something that someone can unearth and have fun with that. But thank you for that. I appreciate that. And if you need our input, we've got a lot of ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that goes down to legislation. Since we just talked about this, do we need to do anything else?
Madam Mayor, I'll just introduce the legislation, which is all that's up for tonight. If that's the will of the council.
That would be fine.
Okay, ordinance 22-01 FY22 fee schedule, an ordinance concerning FY22 fee schedule for the purpose of repealing and adopting the fee schedule with amendments to correct certain fees that did not accurately cover actual expenses as adopted June 8th, 2021 and amended on December 21st, 2021, dealing with fees set by the town of La Plata and all matters generally relating thereto.
Wonderful, thank you. Council, do you have any questions on this? Again, we'll see it again coming up. Any opposition to moving this forward? All right, we will see it again. Yay. All right, matters of information. What do we have?
I don't have anything this evening, Madam Mayor. Michelle, I'm not sure if you have anything or council would like to offer.
I hate to say this, but I actually don't have anything. And that, mark this date. Anything, council, matters of information? Fantastic. All right, future work session topics, the hot one right there, that first one, that class and comp study. When the heck are we going to see that?
I would gladly defer to Kevin on that.
Oh, Kevin, when are we going to see that?
I know we continue to work with the vendors on both the class and compensation study and the organizational assessment, as well as the presentation from last week on ARPA funding. So Kevin, if you have anything further to offer.
Yeah, I think we're hopeful to present that at the first council meeting in February, to have the class and comp study and the organizational assessment.
Why is there a delay, since we were supposed to have it before December, and we're working virtually, so it's not that, snow got in the way. So why such a delay? I mean, that's another 6 weeks that after the fact.
Yeah, Mayor James, it's just taking us a little longer than we had expected, working with the vendors and getting them the information. So I do apologize. We were hopeful to have it done by December 31st, and it is going to take just a couple weeks extra.
Is it because of it's on our end or on their end that is causing the delay?
We've provided them all the information they've asked and requested. So I don't want to blame the vendors or throw them under the bus. It's just taken a little bit longer than we anticipated getting it to you.
And I guess one last question, since we've got to be mindful of every dollar that we spent. Was there there was a proposed time limit? Obviously, we said it was before 31 December, but with the fee that we have paid, was it in the contract when it would be delivered? And is this a violation of the contract?
Mayor James, I will double check the language within the contract on that and let you know. I will say that we have not made final payment to them. So yeah, we've been paying them as the work has been progressing.
Yeah, maybe letting them know that we're not too pleased we're not getting it. At least I'm not too pleased. I'm not going to speak for any of the other members of my council, but yeah, we've been waiting anxiously for this. So, Councilman Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, Councilmember Jenkins, Ward 4. I would just echo, I guess, the urgency that we need this, particularly as we prepare the budget. I mean, I believe, and again, not to be repetitive, but I thought that was the whole intent, that we would have a chance to get this before we really get into the budget start, which I guess will start in a couple of weeks, right? Probably the end of the month. So I would just urge that we get this as soon as we can, so we can. This is a very important piece of information we need for the budget. Thank you.
Any other council members? All right. Anything else on ARPA or anything for the future work sessions before I go to the last item on our agenda? All right. That brings us to public comment. If you would like to speak this evening, I ask that you state your name, your address, whether you live within the incorporated town limits, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Do I have anyone who would like to speak this evening? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Thank you, Councilman Goldsmith. Do I have a second?
Madam Mayor, second.
Thank you, Councilman Jenkins. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council and staff. You did a wonderful job as usual. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Thank you, everyone.